The champagne flute lay shattered on the marble floor, the golden liquid seeping into the intricate patterns like a fresh crimson stain on a priceless tapestry. Outside, the flashbulbs of 100 cameras illuminated the night, capturing a spectacle they couldn't possibly understand. They saw success, glamour, wealth. All I felt was the cold, creeping tendrils of betrayal wrapping around my heart, squeezing the air from my lungs. I knew, standing there amidst the glittering debris of a perfect evening turned nightmare, that the life I had meticulously built, the trust I had so freely given, had just been irrevocably destroyed. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel shimmered with an almost obscene display of wealth. It was the night of Harrington Industries' annual gala, a carefully orchestrated performance of success designed to impress investors, partners, and most importantly, themselves. My husband, Marcus, stood beside me, a nervous smile plastered on his face, his eyes darting around the ballroom as if searching for an escape route. He was so proud to be a part of this world, this empire that Richard Harrington had built from the ground up. He'd worked tirelessly, sacrificing evenings and weekends, all for the promise of a secure future, a corner office, a seat at the table. I had always supported him, cheered him on, believing in his potential even when he doubted himself. But the truth was, my own accomplishments were deliberately obscured, hidden beneath the carefully constructed facade of a devoted wife. No one here knew that I, Emily, held an MBA from Wharton, that I had consulted for Fortune 500 companies before retiring to raise our children. It was a choice I had made willingly, a sacrifice for my family, but one that Richard Harrington clearly saw as a validation of his own antiquated beliefs. The comment hit me like a physical blow, delivered with the casual cruelty that only the truly entitled can muster. "Your wife should be home with the kids, not pretending to understand business," Harrington had sneered, his voice amplified by the sudden hush that had fallen over our small circle. The words were laced with a dismissive venom, a clear attempt to emasculate Marcus and remind me of my place. I saw her asking questions about our Q3 projections earlier. Someone should explain to her that these events are for networking, not interrogation. Wives are supposed to smile and look pretty, not audit the balance sheets. The air crackled with tension. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the familiar sting of injustice burning in my eyes. Marcus, caught in the crossfire, simply froze, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. He was a good man, a loving husband, but ambition had always been his Achilles heel, a vulnerability that Harrington clearly knew how to exploit.
300 pairs of eyes were on us, waiting to see how this would play out, whether Marcus would defend his wife or protect his career. And in that moment, I made a decision. I plastered a smile on my face, a perfectly practiced expression of polite amusement, and excused myself to the restroom. I could feel Harrington's smug gaze boring into my back as I walked away, his confident smirk a silent declaration of victory. He thought he had won. He thought he had silenced me. He thought I was nothing more than a trophy wife, a decorative accessory to be displayed and admired. He couldn't have been more wrong. As I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, the smile slowly faded, replaced by a cold, hard determination. This wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. It was about challenging the outdated power structures that allowed men like Richard Harrington to thrive. It was about showing them that intelligence and ambition weren't confined by gender roles. It was about making him pay for his arrogance, for his condescension, for his blatant disrespect. The plan began to formulate in my mind, a carefully constructed strategy designed to dismantle his empire from within. The days that followed were a masterclass in subtle psychological warfare. Harrington made it a point to publicly compliment me on my appearance, always with a patronizing wink towards Marcus, reinforcing the narrative that I was nothing more than a pretty face. At board meetings, my questions were met with condescending smiles and dismissive answers, my ideas subtly ridiculed and undermined. Marcus, desperate to prove his loyalty, became increasingly distant, echoing Harrington's sentiments and subtly discouraging me from attending company events. Our dinner conversations, once filled with shared dreams and mutual support, devolved into awkward silences and strained politeness. I could see the ambition eating away at him, turning him into a hollow imitation of the man I had fallen in love with. Sleepless nights became the norm, the weight of injustice pressing down on me like a physical burden. I would lie awake for hours, replaying Harrington's words in my head, each repetition fueling my resolve. I tried talking to Marcus about it, explaining how his boss's behavior was affecting me, how it was changing us. But he would brush it off, dismissing my concerns as overreactions or misunderstandings. "He's just old-fashioned, Emily," he'd say, his voice laced with a nervous tremor. "You have to understand, this is his company. We have to play by his rules if we want to get ahead." The desperation in his voice was palpable, the fear of failure outweighing his loyalty to his own wife. I realized then that I was alone in this fight, that if I wanted to take down Harrington, I would have to do it myself.
I started documenting everything, every snide remark, every condescending gesture, every instance of blatant sexism. I meticulously recorded dates, times, and witnesses, building a detailed case against him. I knew that simply complaining wouldn't be enough. I needed proof, undeniable evidence that would expose his true nature and shatter his carefully constructed image. I reached out to a former colleague from my consulting days, a brilliant lawyer named Sarah, explaining my situation and seeking her advice. She listened patiently, her voice filled with empathy and understanding. "This isn't just about your personal experience, Emily," she said. "This is about a pattern of behavior, a culture of discrimination that needs to be exposed. I can help you gather the evidence you need, but you need to be prepared for a long and difficult fight." I knew she was right. Taking on Harrington would be a risky endeavor, one that could have serious consequences for me and my family. But I was no longer willing to stand by and watch him continue to abuse his power. The thought of my daughter growing up in a world where women were still treated as second-class citizens fueled my determination. I had to do this, not just for myself, but for her and for every woman who had ever been silenced. The first attempt to strike back felt like a desperate gamble. I decided to use my understanding of the company's financials against them. I started attending board meetings again, this time armed with meticulously researched questions about discrepancies in their quarterly reports, about the suspiciously large bonuses being awarded to senior executives, about the environmental violations that were being swept under the rug. I phrased my questions politely, innocently, but the underlying message was clear. I was watching them, and I knew what they were up to. Harrington's initial reaction was one of amusement, a dismissive wave of his hand and a patronizing explanation. But as I persisted, as my questions became more pointed and my evidence more compelling, I could see the unease growing in his eyes. He started cutting me off, refusing to answer my questions directly and attempting to change the subject. But I wouldn't let him. I continued to press him, forcing him to acknowledge the issues and defend his actions. The other board members, initially silent and complicit, started to shift in their seats, their discomfort palpable. They knew that I was right, that something was rotten within Harrington Industries, and they were afraid of being exposed. My actions, however, had unintended consequences. Marcus, caught between his loyalty to Harrington and his duty to his wife, began to crack under the pressure. He started drinking heavily, lashing out at me in private, accusing me of trying to ruin his career. "Why are you doing this, Emily?" he'd scream, his face contorted with anger and frustration. "Why can't you just be happy with what we have?" "You're going to destroy everything." I tried to reason with him, to explain that I wasn't doing this to hurt him, but to protect him, to protect our future. But he wouldn't listen. He had become so consumed by ambition, so terrified of losing his place in Harrington's empire, that he was blind to the truth. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, he stormed out of the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my fears. As I sat there in the darkness, I couldn't help but wonder if I had gone too far, if my quest for revenge was costing me everything I held dear. But then I remembered Harrington's words, his dismissive arrogance, his blatant disrespect, and I knew that I couldn't back down, that I had to see this through, no matter the cost. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. each tick a hammer blow against my resolve. I stared out the rain-streaked window, the city lights blurring into an indistinguishable mass of yellow and white. My reflection stared back, a ghost of the woman I once was, haunted by the choices I had made and the sacrifices I had endured. Marcus's words echoed in my head. "You're going to destroy everything." Was he right? Was my quest for justice, my burning desire to expose Harrington, blinding me to the damage I was inflicting on my own life? The thought was a cold blade twisting in my gut. I had alienated my husband, strained my relationships with my friends, and jeopardized my own future, all in the name of revenge. And for what? To prove a point to a man who clearly didn't care? A man who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed? The weight of it all threatened to crush me, to suffocate me with despair. I sank to the floor, burying my face in my hands, the sobs racking my body like a physical assault. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I was supposed to be happy, successful, surrounded by love and laughter. Instead, I was alone, broken, and consumed by a rage that threatened to consume me whole. The rain continued to fall, a relentless downpour that mirrored the storm raging inside me. I felt like I was drowning, lost in a sea of bitterness and regret. Was there any way out? Could I ever escape the darkness that had enveloped me? Or was I destined to be consumed by it, to become another victim of Richard Harrington's ruthless ambition?
The morning dawned gray and cold, the city shrouded in a thick fog that seemed to amplify the sense of isolation. I woke up on the living room floor, my body stiff and aching, my head throbbing with a dull ache. The remnants of the previous night's despair clung to me like a shroud, weighing me down with their suffocating presence. I stumbled into the kitchen, craving coffee, anything to numb the pain and sharpen my senses. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I glanced at the stack of documents I had been compiling, the evidence of Harrington's misdeeds, the proof of his corruption and his abuse of power. They seemed so insignificant now, so futile in the face of the personal cost I had already paid. What good would it do to expose him, to bring him down, if it meant sacrificing everything I held dear? Was revenge really worth it? The kettle whistled, jolting me out of my reverie. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter liquid burning my throat as I swallowed it down. I needed to clear my head, to find some perspective, to decide whether to continue down this destructive path or to cut my losses and walk away. I decided to go for a walk, to escape the suffocating confines of the house and breathe in some fresh air. As I walked through the park, the fog slowly began to dissipate, revealing the vibrant colors of the autumn leaves. The beauty of nature, the resilience of life, struck me with a sudden force. Despite the darkness, despite the pain, there was still hope, still the possibility of renewal. I sat down on a bench, watching the squirrels scamper through the trees, their playful energy a stark contrast to my own somber mood. And then I saw her, a young woman sitting alone on a nearby bench, her face etched with sadness, her eyes filled with a familiar pain. She reminded me of myself, of the woman I was before Harrington, before the betrayal, before the rage consumed me. I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out to her, to offer her comfort, to let her know that she wasn't alone. As I sat there watching her, a new sense of clarity began to emerge. This wasn't just about me, about my personal vendetta against Richard Harrington. It was about something much bigger, about fighting for justice, about protecting others from the kind of abuse I had endured. It was about creating a world where women were valued and respected, where their voices were heard, where their intelligence was recognized. And I realized that I couldn't back down, that I couldn't let Harrington win. I had to continue fighting, not just for myself, but for every woman who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. But I also knew that I couldn't continue down the same path, that I couldn't let my anger consume me, that I couldn't sacrifice everything I held dear in the name of revenge. I needed to change my strategy, to find a way to expose Harrington without destroying myself in the process. I needed to be smarter, more cunning, more strategic. I needed to use his own weaknesses against him, to exploit his arrogance and his hubris. The plan began to take shape in my mind, a new strategy built on a foundation of cold, calculated determination.
I would no longer be the victim, the naive wife who was easily dismissed and ignored. I would become the puppet master, pulling the strings from behind the scenes, orchestrating Harrington's downfall with precision and skill. I would use my intelligence, my resources, and my connections to dismantle his empire from within, to expose his true nature to the world, and to ensure that he paid for his crimes. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a destructive force. It was a fuel, a source of energy that would drive me forward, that would give me the strength to overcome any obstacle. I stood up from the bench, a new sense of purpose filling my veins. The fog had completely dissipated, the sun shining brightly in the sky. It was time to get to work. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. The shift in perspective was immediate. I wasn't just seeking revenge. I was building a case, brick by painstaking brick. My first move was to solidify my documentation. I upgraded the security system in our house, not for protection, but for surveillance. Hidden cameras, disguised as everyday objects, became my silent witnesses, recording every conversation, every interaction, every subtle nuance of Marcus's behavior and anyone else who entered our home. I needed irrefutable proof, time-stamped and securely stored, that couldn't be easily dismissed or denied. I started attending every company event, every gala, every fundraiser, but now I was playing a different role. I was the attentive wife, the supportive partner, the charming socialite. I smiled, I laughed, I made small talk, all the while observing, listening, and gathering information. I became a master of disguise, blending into the background, becoming invisible, all while collecting the pieces I needed. I reconnected with Sarah, my lawyer friend, and we began strategizing the legal aspects of my plan. She introduced me to a forensic accountant, a quiet, unassuming man named David, who specialized in uncovering financial irregularities. Together, we meticulously combed through Harrington Industries' financial records, searching for any evidence of wrongdoing, any hidden accounts, any suspicious transactions. It was a tedious, painstaking process, but slowly, surely, we began to uncover a pattern of corruption, a web of deceit that stretched all the way to the top. I discovered that Harrington had been systematically siphoning money from the company for years, using offshore accounts and shell corporations to hide his tracks. He had also been engaging in insider trading, using confidential information to make illegal profits. The evidence was damning, but I needed more. I needed something that would directly link Harrington to the abuse and the discrimination that I and so many other women had suffered. I needed the smoking gun. That's when I decided to focus on Marcus. He was my weak link, my point of entry into Harrington's inner circle. I knew that he was struggling, that he was torn between his loyalty to his boss and his love for me. I decided to exploit that conflict, to use his guilt and his fear against him. I started being more affectionate, more understanding, more supportive. I told him that I forgave him for his past behavior, that I understood the pressure he was under. I made him feel safe, secure, loved. Slowly, gradually, he began to open up, to confide in me his doubts, his fears, his regrets. He told me about the things he had witnessed, the things he had been asked to do, the things that were eating away at his soul. He told me about Harrington's treatment of women, his crude jokes, his unwanted advances, his dismissive attitude. He told me about the secret meetings, the backroom deals, the lies and the cover-ups. And he told me about the document, a document that contained all the evidence I needed to expose Harrington's crimes. It was a confidential report, commissioned by the board of directors, that detailed the findings of an internal investigation into Harrington's financial dealings and his management practices. The report confirmed everything I suspected, and it included damning testimony from several current and former employees. Harrington had suppressed the report, burying it deep within the company's archives, but Marcus knew where to find it. Getting my hands on that report became my obsession. I knew it was a risky move, one that could have serious consequences if I was caught, but I was willing to take the risk. I needed that report, not just for myself, but for every woman who had ever been victimized by Harrington. The opportunity presented itself during a company retreat, a weekend getaway to a secluded resort in the mountains. Harrington, Marcus, and several other senior executives were in attendance. I made sure to be there, playing the role of the dutiful wife, all while carefully orchestrating my plan. On the second night of the retreat, after dinner and drinks, I accidentally overheard Harrington and Marcus talking in the hotel bar. They were discussing the report, Harrington boasting about how he had managed to keep it hidden, Marcus expressing his unease about the whole situation. I pretended not to notice them, but I made sure to position myself close enough to hear every word. Later that night, after Marcus had gone to bed, I slipped out of our room and made my way to his laptop. I knew his password. He wasn't particularly security conscious, and I quickly accessed his email account. I searched for the report, but it wasn't there. Then I remembered something Marcus had said earlier that evening, that Harrington kept a copy of the report on a secure USB drive hidden in his office. I knew that breaking into Harrington's office was a dangerous proposition, but I was running out of time. I had to take the risk. I made my way to Harrington's suite, careful to avoid the security cameras. I picked the lock, a skill I had acquired from a rather unexpected source, and slipped inside. The office was dark and silent. I quickly located Harrington's desk and began searching for the USB drive. I knew I didn't have much time before he returned, so I worked quickly and efficiently. After what felt like an eternity, I found it, hidden inside a false bottom in his desk drawer. I grabbed the USB drive and slipped back out of the office, leaving no trace of my presence. Back in my room, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and opened the report. As I read through the pages, my blood ran cold. The evidence was even more damning than I had imagined. Harrington's crimes were not only financial, but also involved serious breaches of ethics and violations of human rights. I knew that this report was the key to bringing him down, to exposing his true nature to the world. I copied the report onto my own secure hard drive and then carefully erased it from the USB drive, replacing it with a harmless file. I returned the USB drive to its hiding place in Harrington's office, making sure everything was exactly as I had found it. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened, playing the role of the happy, oblivious wife. Harrington, none the wiser, continued to bask in his arrogance and his sense of invincibility. He had no idea that his world was about to come crashing down around him. The next few weeks were a delicate dance, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. I had the evidence, the smoking gun, but I needed to deploy it strategically to maximize the impact and ensure that Harrington couldn't wriggle free. I consulted with Sarah and David, meticulously planning every detail of the operation. We decided to leak the report to the press, but not all at once. We would release it in stages, each release carefully timed to inflict maximum damage and to keep the story in the headlines. Our first target was Harrington's reputation. We leaked excerpts from the report to a prominent investigative journalist, a woman named Emily Carter, who had a reputation for taking down corrupt CEOs. Emily was initially skeptical, but after reviewing the evidence, she was convinced. She agreed to run the story, but she wanted more. She wanted an exclusive interview with someone who had been directly affected by Harrington's actions. That's when I knew I had to come forward, to reveal my identity and to tell my story to the world. It was a terrifying prospect, but I knew it was the only way to truly bring Harrington to justice. I prepared myself for the onslaught of media attention, the scrutiny, the potential backlash. I knew that Harrington would stop at nothing to discredit me, to silence me, but I was ready. I had the truth on my side, and I wasn't afraid to use it. The day the story broke, the world exploded. The headlines screamed accusations of corruption, abuse, and fraud. Harrington's carefully constructed image began to crumble before his eyes. The stock price of Harrington Industries plummeted, investors fled, and his political allies distanced themselves from him. He was radioactive. Harrington's initial reaction was one of disbelief, followed by rage. He lashed out at everyone around him, accusing them of betrayal, of incompetence, of being part of a conspiracy. He denied the allegations, claiming that the report was a fabrication, a smear campaign orchestrated by his enemies. But the evidence was overwhelming. The facts were irrefutable. He couldn't deny the truth forever. He tried to silence Emily, threatening her with lawsuits, but she refused to back down. She had the backing of her news organization, and she was determined to expose the truth, no matter the cost. He tried to discredit me, digging up dirt from my past, spreading rumors, and making false accusations. But I was prepared for his tactics, and I had built a solid wall of defense around myself. Sarah, my lawyer friend, was a formidable opponent, and she quickly shut down his attempts to smear my name. As the pressure mounted, Harrington began to crack. He became erratic, paranoid, and desperate. He started making mistakes, revealing his true nature to the world. His arrogance, his hubris, his sense of invincibility all vanished, replaced by fear and desperation. I watched with a cold satisfaction as his world crumbled around him. But I knew that this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. I knew that Harrington wouldn't go down without a fight, that he would try to take me down with him. I had to be prepared for anything. That's when I discovered his biggest secret, his ultimate weakness. Something so dark, so depraved, that it made my blood run cold. He had been using company funds to pay for indiscretions. I won't go into detail, but this was the final nail in his coffin. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about something far more sinister. I knew that if this information came to light, it would destroy him completely. The information came from an anonymous source, a disgruntled employee who had witnessed Harrington's behavior firsthand. The employee had been afraid to come forward, fearing retaliation, but after seeing my story in the news, he had decided to take the risk. He contacted me through a secure email address, providing me with documents, photographs, and recordings that confirmed everything I suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to verify it, to make sure it was authentic. David, the forensic accountant, worked tirelessly to analyze the data, to trace the financial transactions, to confirm the identities of the individuals involved. After days of painstaking work, he came back to me with his findings. The evidence was real. Harrington was not only a corrupt businessman, but also a predator, a monster who had been preying on vulnerable individuals for years. I knew that I couldn't keep this information to myself. I had a moral obligation to expose him, to protect others from his depravity. I contacted Emily Carter again, providing her with the new evidence. She was shocked, but she knew that this was a story that had to be told. She agreed to run it, but she insisted on doing her own investigation to verify the information independently. She spent weeks interviewing witnesses, gathering documents, and building her case. Finally, she was ready. The day the story broke, it was a tsunami. The headlines screamed accusations of misconduct and abuse. The public was outraged, demanding justice. Politicians called for investigations, and law enforcement agencies launched inquiries. Harrington's world collapsed. He was immediately fired from his job, stripped of his titles, and ostracized by his peers. His reputation was ruined, his fortune was gone, and his future was uncertain. He had lost everything. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to see him held accountable for his crimes, to see him face the consequences of his actions. I worked with the authorities, providing them with all the evidence I had gathered. They launched a criminal investigation, and after months of investigation, they finally had enough evidence to arrest him. The setup was complete. The stage was set. The trap was ready. All that was left was to lure Harrington into it. I knew that he was desperate, that he was looking for a way out, that he would be willing to do anything to salvage his reputation and his freedom. I decided to use that desperation against him. I sent him an anonymous message offering him a deal. I told him that I was willing to drop my claims, to stop pursuing him if he met my demands. My demands were simple. I wanted him to confess to his crimes, to apologize to his victims, and to donate all his remaining assets to a charity that supported women who had been victims of abuse. I knew that he would never agree to those terms, but that wasn't the point. The point was to lure him into a meeting, to get him in a place where I could confront him, where I could expose him to the world. He hesitated at first, but after a few days he responded. He agreed to meet me, but he insisted on choosing the location. He wanted to meet in a secluded place where we could talk in private without the risk of being overheard. I agreed, but I had my own conditions. I insisted on bringing a witness, someone I trusted, someone who could verify my account of the meeting. He was reluctant, but he eventually agreed. The meeting was set for the following night at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a dangerous place, a place where anything could happen, but I was ready. I had spent months planning this moment, preparing for this confrontation. I knew that this was my chance to finally bring Harrington to justice, to end his reign of terror once and for all. As I drove to the warehouse that night, my heart pounded in my chest. I was nervous, but I was also determined. I knew that this was the most dangerous thing I had ever done, but I was willing to risk everything to achieve my goal. I arrived at the warehouse a few minutes early. The building was dark and silent, the only sound the wind whistling through the broken windows. I parked my car a safe distance away and waited for Harrington to arrive. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, I saw his headlights in the distance. He pulled up to the warehouse, his car casting long shadows across the deserted landscape. He got out of the car, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and fear. He looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. I took a deep breath and stepped out of my car. It was time. The moment of truth had arrived. As Harrington approached, I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead, his eyes darting around, paranoid. "Where is she?" he spat, his voice a strained whisper. "Who?" I replied, feigning innocence, even though my blood was ice. He gestured wildly. "The witness! You said you'd bring someone. Where are they hiding?" I just smirked. "Oh, they're here. They've been here all along." I nodded towards the warehouse itself, and that's when the doors swung open, revealing a phalanx of reporters, cameras flashing, lights blinding. Emily Carter stepped forward, microphone in hand, a grim satisfaction on her face. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice amplified through the warehouse, "we have a few questions for you." His face contorted, a mask of fury and terror. He tried to lunge at me, but two figures stepped out of the shadows, David and Sarah, their faces set, blocking his path. "You set me up," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You ruined me." I simply smiled. "No, Mr. Harrington, you ruined yourself. I just gave you the opportunity."
The next hour was a blur. The reporters descended on him like vultures, their questions relentless, their cameras capturing every flicker of emotion on his face. Emily played the recording of his confession, the one he didn't know he was making when he agreed to my deal. The audio filled the warehouse, his own words condemning him, his voice a desperate plea for forgiveness that no one would grant. The police arrived soon after, sirens wailing in the distance. They cuffed him, his face now a broken landscape of defeat. As they led him away, he looked at me, his eyes filled with hatred, but also a strange sort of understanding. He knew he was finished. The news spread like wildfire, social media exploding with condemnation and outrage. The footage of his arrest was broadcast around the globe, his name forever synonymous with corruption and abuse. His empire crumbled, his wealth vanished. His legacy was tainted beyond repair. In the days that followed, I testified before Congress, sharing my story with the world. I became a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for other victims. Sarah and David stood by my side, their support unwavering. The charity I had demanded Harrington donate to flourished, providing assistance and resources to women in need. As for Harrington, he was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, corruption, and other unspeakable charges that I won't detail here. He was sentenced to decades in prison, his life effectively over. He lost everything. I just smiled. The weight of it all, the months of planning, the constant fear, finally lifted. It was over. I had survived. I had won. Looking back, I don't know what I should have done differently. Given the circumstances, it was the only viable choice. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.